spray paint on my tumbler. I'm gonna go ahead and let this dry for a couple hours before I move on to the next step. See you then. Now that our tumbler has dried completely from the white spray paint, now it's time to kind of experiment with the design you're going to create. My hope is to do a wood grain effect on this tumbler. So I'm going to experiment using a few different things and test out a few different techniques that doesn't involve alcohol inks because I don't happen to have any of those on hand. So I want to find a technique that I can use, maybe mixing acrylic paint and a wood stain. So I think I can come up with an interesting design, just experimenting, and you guys are going to follow along with me as I figure out what works and what doesn't. So let me bring you in a little closer so you can see the different things that I'm going to try on this design. So we've got some great options to use, and I'm looking towards the acrylic paint choices and the wood stain and combining that with our electrofoils. So this is Starcraft electrofoils, and it's typically used in a heat transfer application. But I have found so many uses for these lately that I'd like to try to experiment using them on our epoxy tumblers. And I have a feeling I'm going to love the way they turn out because I've already experimented with the gold on my hydro dip tumbler, and now I want to see how I can use this to sort of make this wood grain geode-esque tumbler. So the first thing I'm going to do is just grab my paintbrush, mixing bowl, and my stain and acrylics, and I'm gonna paint my white tumbler with a few strokes to make sort of this wood grain background. And to do that, I'm gonna use a few of my yellows that I have on hand, maybe a little bit of gray and black, and I have some orange, to try to get an effect that I feel like kind of mimics the grain of wood. And then after that dries, I'm going to go over it with my stain. So the stain will grip a hold of any of that acrylic brush strokes that I've left behind to create that wood tone effect. So here we go. Just grab your brush, grab a little bit of paint, and let's get to creating. So I'm just going to take my cup and apply some dry strokes of this yellow acrylic paint. The thing about wood is it's very linear. So when I do this design, I'm trying to keep my brush strokes pretty linear. Every now and then in a wood grain, you'll get a little bit of a wave kind of effect in it. So I mean, that's okay too if you want to do sort of that stroke as well. But for the majority of this, I just want to keep some vertical lines moving around my tumbler. And I'm also going to mix with multi-tones of this yellow. So I don't want it to all be yellow. I don't want it to all be white. I want it to have multi-dimensional colors with the different tones of yellow that I have and orange. And that's going to give me that wood grain effect, or sort of like the age rings on a piece of wood. So now I'm using the Apple Barrel Yellow Flame. The first color I put on was Anita's All-Purpose, and that was the Macaroni Yellow. Another thing that I've noticed with wood grain is sometimes you get this sort of a V effect. And I would like to take some of this paint that I'm using to create that effect. So when I'm brush stroking, I'm trying to keep a sort of a diagonal brush stroke line, and then I'm going to come back up and do another in the opposite direction to create that sort of V effect that sometimes you see in a wood grain. Alright, and now I'm on my third yellow, which is the Apple Barrel Yellow. gonna grab my orange to throw in there to do a few accent lines of some of the deeper wood grain. So the orange is called Anita's All-Purpose Orange. Now if you want to create a knot in your wood grain, you could just kind of swirl a little bit of the darker color toward the end to try to create that sort of knot, which is where a branch would have been in your piece of wood. So I'm going to do that with the orange since it's the darker color, and that knot sort of needs to spiral up your cup to create sort of a line that connects the knot. So I also have this metallic silver I'm going to add in there, and this is going to be my darkest hue on my cup. So I want to use this sparingly. I'm going to apply it at the knot area and just a few of the lines to make them stand out to show that sort of wood grain pattern. And I'm trying to just use the very tip of my brush so that way it's more linear and not fanned out. So here I go, applying it to the knot. So I'm going to have it some in the circle of the knot, and I'm going to have it sort of snake around the knot and create this nice linear effect on my cup. And when I'm stacking these colors, I try to go from the lightest color first to the darkest color on top. That way it doesn't just look like a bunch of stripes all over. This gives it a nice little bit of depth to the cup. Now I'm just going to kind of feather around the edge with my darker color at the top of the rim. I want it to sort of create this vignette effect where the lip of it is darker and then the base of it's darker. So I sort of like having this to help create like this transition from a nice dark wood grain effect to a nice bright one. So this is going to help focus your eye line towards the center of the cup, which is where hopefully I'll be placing a decal with some vinyl. You gotta be careful about not just doing the same brush strokes all around, or you start to get a man-made look versus that organic, natural wood grain effect. So this is what I've ended up with. So I've got the blacks, the oranges, and the yellows. Okay, so now it's important that this dries before we go to our next step, which is adding the dark stain. So the dark stain is going to be transparent, so you're going to see all these lines that we created within it. So I'm going to give this a little bit to dry and clean my brush, and we'll meet back and take it on to the next step. Okay, so for the stain, we're going to want to have this on our cup turner because the stain will take a little while to dry. So I want to try to make sure I get my cup on here because the stain is going to be very liquid, very sticky and messy. So if you wanted to wear gloves, this would be a good time to do that. So I'm just going to grab my stain and open it. This is the ebony wood stain from Varthane, and I'm going to just get my brush covered in the stain and start making some linear lines of stain all over my cup. And it will cover up all of our color underneath. So we just want to do some light coats all over, and then we'll go back and wipe some of it off. And then once I've got enough of the stain on there, I'm going to take a rag and wipe away the excess. When you wipe away the stain, you want to make sure you're still going in the linear motions, because you don't want to create any horizontal lines on your wood grain. So do be careful that when you're wiping in nice vertical strokes. And this is a good time to sort of assess what your wood grain looks like and decide if you need to add any additional colors or more stain to it. Okay, so that's enough stain in my opinion, so I'm going to go ahead and close it up and let my stain dry on my tumbler probably overnight, because the stain's not meant to go on a tumbler, so it's going to take longer for it to cure. As you can see, mine has got a lot of gray in it, but it does have some of those yellows, and the oranges show through on the undertones there. My wood grain tumbler has dried overnight, and I went ahead and applied one more coat of stain on the top of what I had to sort of lighten and deepen this color to make it more of a brown tone. So now that that has dried, I'm going to take some spray adhesive and I'm going to spray the cup so it's tacky, and then I'm going to go and take these electrofoils and place them on the cup and allow that to dry. When I peel these off, it's going to leave a red foil behind, so I want to get that little bit of a sparkle in here without it being glittery. So this is just going to give it a little bit of shine underneath the red spray paint coat that I'll be doing after this. So we want to just take our spray adhesive, spray on a coat, let that dry completely before we pull off our foils. And then we're going to go out back and we're going to spray paint our cup red. So this is a multi-step process to get the desired effect that I'm going for. If there are some parts of the cup that you don't want anything on and that you just want to preserve that wood effect, you could tape off the areas that you want to remain with this wooden look. But I'm going to sand away these finishes once I'm done to get sort of this geode look. So here we go. We'll spray some adhesive on our cup. Just a light coat. And then we just need some scissors to trim us a sheet of this electrofoil to wrap around our tumbler. And you'll be placing the silver side down on your cup. Because my cup has this ridge on it, I'm doing it in a few separate sheets, so that way I can get the best coverage on it, because I want to try to get as much of this red kind of shine on the cup. And I'm actually going to do it on the bottom too. You can just go with your hands and push it down on there, or if you have a squeegee or something that you'd like to use to flatten it out, you could use that. So like this silicone brush, for example, I just want to try to make sure that I have the foil touching as much as the tumbler as I can get. And then we're just going to let that dry for a little bit before we remove it. And I feel like I want to go ahead and speed this process along, so I'm going to hit it with this heat gun real quick so that way we can move on to our next step. Just make sure you stay far enough away that you're not melting your foils. This is just gonna help dry that adhesive a little bit in there. Once I feel that that's dry enough, then I can proceed to removing the foils that I put on there to reveal that little bit of shine from the red foils. So you can see where some of them might have peeled up a little bit. That's when you can just kind of go back along with your finger and press those little bit of flakes back down. This is also a good time to decide if you want more foil coverage. If you do, you could just repeat the process and spray your tumbler one more time with the adhesive and apply your foils again. So I don't know if you can see where it heavily applied here in this area, but then it didn't apply as much over here. So that might be an instance where I'd want to go back with the foils and apply a little bit more in that specific spot. But I do kind of like this distressed look that the foils left on the tumbler. That makes an interesting look. Alright, so now that I got my Mod Podge layer applied onto my tumbler, I'm just going to allow this to dry for a couple hours and then we'll come back and revisit this. So we're done with our spray paint coat and it's dried completely. Let's go ahead and grab a sander. You could just use this little padded sanding block to sort of sand away some of the spray paint finish that we placed on here. So we're just gonna kind of sand in a random pattern to get this sort of geode effect. And once we get our edges feathered the way we want, we can then grab even an electric sander to sand down further through the foils to reveal the wood grain texture that's in this cup. So I'm going to grab my sander, I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to sand down for a minute to reveal the wood grain. So we're gonna apply vinyl to our tumbler now. So I have went ahead and took this Starcraft Magic and I cut the word Razorbacks out and I want to use some transfer tape to transfer this onto my tumbler. So I'm just gonna grab some transfer tape and apply my vinyl face down and then run my squeegee over to transfer that vinyl onto the transfer tape. I've now applied my vinyl to my tumbler, and before we can seal our cup with the epoxy, we need to make sure that we seal the layer that our vinyl is on so the epoxy doesn't affect the adhesive and cause the edges to curl up under the epoxy. That will leave a bumpy texture on your cup. So make sure you seal your vinyl after you have it applied to your cup. You could use something just like Mod Podge, or if you have a clear spray coat, that would work also. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my brush and apply that thin coat over this vinyl that we just applied. So now that I've applied my final decal onto my tumbler, it's time to get ready to epoxy. So my Mod Podge has dried completely. I'm just going to take my tumbler and apply it back to my cuptisserie before I mix up my next batch of epoxy. Now if you do notice that you have some imperfections in your surface, you could go back and sand them before you put your next coat of epoxy on. That'll ensure that you get a nice smooth finish on your tumbler.